Frostpunk is a game, but it's really a lot more than that. It's a journey into the hopelessness of humankind and the lengths we will go to ensure survival. Okay, maybe it isn't that deep, but it does ask the player what lengths they are willing to go to ensure that their virtual city survives. It also conveys the hopelessness of the situation through a number of ways that immerse you in a world deeper than any other strategy game I've played. As much as I love games like Warhammer 2,
oh my god, I hate this game!
I never really see myself getting overly immersed. This is because the scale is so massive that I lose sight of the empire I'm creating, and the cities I own just become a collection of numbers showing how happy they are or how much money they bring in. In Frostpunk, you're put in charge of a single colony at a time across each of its scenarios. For the sake of this video, I'll be focusing on the new home scenario since it's the one that came with the base game before any other updates. But each of the scenarios are on par with this, so the same immersion can be felt each time you load one up. For the sake of analysis, I will be spoiling some of the plot and events of the scenario, so if you want to go in completely blind, you may want to go and play the game first. But I personally believe that even though the plot of each scenario is excellent, the real enjoyment of the game comes from managing your colony and making the decisions. Before you even select a scenario to start playing, you're already getting immersed by the design of the main menu, both from a visual and audio perspective. The logos appear with nothing accompanying them but the snow rushing past and the sound of wind chilling the text at the core. This is something that most people won't even see, as you can skip them by pressing any button upon launching the game, but it's showing us that 11-bit put a lot of work into establishing that Frostpunk has a hostile world, and you're about to enter it. The near silent title screen again has nothing but snow rushing past on the screen and the soft sound of the wind. In the background we can see the blurred crowds of people holding precious few lanterns among them and all looking at you for guidance. Pressing any button introduces you to one of the staples of Frostpunk's sound design. I don't know how to describe this sound, but it's something you'll come to know and dread, and you'll quickly find out why. The text described in the new home scenario is fairly generic, but it's only that way because so many games have used this wording before. None have kept that promise as much as Frostpunk. It tells the player that the world is ending, and a group has fled to one of the last places on Earth capable of supporting life. It tells them that the group must adapt to survive, and that they should be wary of who they become in the process. Once the player clicks start, one of the most incredible cutscenes I've seen in gaming plays, and it is neither pun nor hyperbole to say that this cutscene, like many other things in this game, gives me chills every single time I see it. I won't show all of the cutscene here because it's something that should be experienced for the first time upon playing, but I'll summarise what it tells you. Shortly before the events of A New Home, the world was thriving in a steampunk era. Progress was being made to advance technology and civilization to new heights. That all stopped when the snow came. Without a warning, it halted the world in its tracks, affecting everyone from commoner to ruler without prejudice. Class lines evaporated as the world was lost to snow, and with it, the last traces of humanity. Many perished in the oppressive cold, and the few that remained left home in search of new hope to the north. After leaving everything behind and travelling for weeks and months, you finally come to it. This is the generator. And, as the final line of the cutscene says,
"The time has come to build the last city on Earth."
And with that, the game begins, and the clock starts ticking. The first of many tooltips appears and tells you that the generator must be powered by coal to keep people warm, and that without it, everyone will freeze to death. Now normally in games, the first few minutes or even hours take it easy on you to allow you to find your feet, but Frostpunk takes a different approach. The ice and snow are unforgiving, and failing to account for this will punish you and your citizens without consideration for your lack of experience. If you send people to gather loose piles of resources with nothing to protect them from the elements, then they will quickly fall ill and become a drain on your resources and productivity. If you fail to build housing quickly enough or gather enough fuel for the generator to last you the night, people will again become sick, and if they are left without treatment for too long, they will become gravely ill and eventually die. On top of keeping people alive, you must also keep them happy. You can see how people are feeling about your rule from the hope and discontent bars. Of course, you want hope to be as high as possible and discontent to be as low as possible, and every single thing you do over the course of the game will affect these two bars. The decision made by 11-bit to split happiness into two separate bars would have been so easy to leave out, but its inclusion is another thing that sets it apart from other games. The world of Frostpunk is so devoid of happiness that it wouldn't make any sense if you were able to make people feel anything better than indifferent. Hope and discontent are things that humanity turns to when we're out of happiness. We hope for the day that we get to be happy again and become agitated at the thought of someone steering us in the wrong direction. In this regard, I see Frostpunk's world as a similar world to the one of The Walking Dead. The characters in the show tried to make the best of things, and, while there are some brief moments of happiness, these are derived from having hope. When things go wrong, people get angry and blame the person in charge since it's all there is left to do. The world is gone, and walkers aren't conscious beings, so they have nowhere else left to turn their frustrations. When things are going well, people listen to Rick's orders with hardly any questioning. When things turn bad, they take their issues to Rick and start to rebel against him. This is exactly what we see in Frostpunk, except the zombies have been replaced with snow, and the Americans escaping to Georgia, and now Londoners escaping to what I would guess is Scotland, judging by the weather. Shortly after the game begins, you'll receive the first prompt to open the Book of Laws. Just reading some of the laws you can pass from the first second, you realise what kind of world you've been thrust into. There are options to thin out the food with water or sawdust to make the rations go further, to choose whether the gravely ill should be kept alive until you can treat them, or if they should be subjected to radical and unsafe treatments, whether children should be put to work in places like sawmills and factories, or whether they should be protected in child shelters. Every single law is a valid option, and the only person that can decide which ones are a step too far is the player. As you progress through the Book of Laws, you can enact things that push you further from humanity, or pull you back from the edge. Once again, the only one that can make these decisions is the player. There is no guidance from the game other than the reaction of the colony to each law that gets passed, and even then, it's unreliable. Sustaining life, for example, will cause you to keep the gravely ill alive at the cost of them taking up medical beds. This raises hope, but also discontent, as some people see the gravely ill as a burden and think that it's better to get rid of them and save the beds for those that can be cured. This ties into the grey morality of the game. No decision is right or wrong as long as it can be justified by increasing the survival chances of the colony. People will have mixed feelings about every single decision you make, which is very true to life. Look at two things that happened in real life not so long ago. The American presidency and Brexit are two events that divided their respective nations, and no matter which side of the fence you are on, you have strong feelings about the result. This greyness and uncertainty is another thing that helps immerse you into the game, as you constantly doubt your every decision and keep thinking about them long after you've made them. Once you progress far enough into the game, you will be given the option to choose one of two books of laws to keep people on side. You can choose to enact order over your colony and use policing, propaganda, and even imprisonment to keep people in line. Or you can use faith and convince your people that you're on a holy mission and that faith in you and the generator will see them through. Again, either of these options are valid with no definitive right answer, and both of them have options that some will consider going too far, but it's all left to the player to decide what needs to be done. You have enough time in the game to enact every single law available, so most people assume that they should do so, since the game never explicitly tells you not to. It's a fair assumption, but it's something that you may come to regret. Pushing through to fill up the books of laws will give you more tools with which to win your colony's favour, but the further you go, the more radical these tools become. Choosing order, you will turn to propaganda, imprisonment, and eventually public executions. Faith will lead you to a cult mentality where people must convert to this new faith or be tortured and eventually executed. Getting to the end of either of these trees will cause the colony to give you absolute control, but it comes at a cost, and only you can decide if it's necessary. The only thing that truly matters is surviving the cold. The generator is the heart of your colony, and, as shown by the starting cutscene, it will be the focus of the majority of your game. It keeps things warm around it, but before long it will have too little power or too weak a range to keep everybody warm. You'll have to research upgrades to increase its range and power, and create smaller hubs to emit heat to places too far to feel the generator's warmth. Along with this, you'll have to supply a steady flow of coal to keep it running, and this supply must be increased with each upgrade you build. If you fail to do so, then the generator will turn off, and people will freeze and quickly become sick, while those that remain will become angrier than ever. If you push the generator too far into overdrive, then it will buckle under its own stress and be destroyed, leaving no hope for those that remain. This is yet another balancing act that Frostpunk throws at you with little guidance other than people's complaints and the temperature overlay. Activating this view shows you the temperature of every single building in the colony and how at risk of illness people are from living and working there. If you have the resources, you can identify the coldest areas and give them some support with heaters or steam hubs. If you don't, then all you can do is watch as more and more people get sick and start to turn on you. The composition of this view is another masterstroke of visual design. Along the top you can see how each colour corresponds to a temperature state, and every single building will be one of these colours. This lets you tell at a glance which areas and buildings need attention and which don't. Beyond this, it's also another excellent way to convey to the player how dire the situation is. Even when every single building is heated, the streets and all the land you haven't built on will always be cold, and you can't do anything to fix that. If you look even closer, you can see your citizens moving around, and they too are almost as cold as the snow. Even through all your hard work making the colony capable of surviving, people are still in danger just by going outside to go to work. Over the course of the campaign, the temperature will rise and fall, with the largest fall coming at the end, and each time it changes, you'll need to check every single building to make sure people are safe. This adds a constant stress to the game over which areas get priority and which will be left to freeze for another day. Even though the temperature occasionally gets warmer, as the game goes on, it will always be on a downward trend, meaning if you fail to prepare for it early, then you will pay for your mistakes. This further adds to the hopelessness of the game, as no matter what you do, it always seems to get colder without any sign of respite. The world is unforgiving to the point that even when you make no mistakes and keep up with the temperature changes, there will still be times when you can do nothing but watch. That helpless feeling stays with you for the whole game. It makes you wonder whether you've done something wrong and should start again, or if you should stick to your guns and push forward. And that is truly incredible game design. Making a player doubt themselves even when they've done everything right could be seen as infuriating by some people, but I believe it's completely intentional and incredibly immersive. As I touched on at the start of this video, the sound and visual design of this game are truly spectacular. The effects on the screen when the temperature rises and falls immerse you into the game and cause you to let out a sigh of relief when the steam covers your view, and a feeling of dread when the ice starts to take over. The sounds accompanying these effects are similarly effective. The hiss of steam almost mimics that sigh of relief, while the cracking of ice mimics the building of tension. The visual presentation of the game itself is also effective in this regard. While the game isn't the most graphically impressive thing I've ever seen, it uses what fidelity it has to great effect. All the buildings have different states depending on their heat level, and they change dynamically between them as the temperature rises and falls. If you place down a steam hub, the snow will melt within its area of effect, and when it is turned off, it will gradually fill back in. None of this is incredibly detailed, but it all helps to convey the seriousness of the cold and how desperate the situation is, as, without the heat, the colony will succumb to snow just as quickly. In the city view, citizens just look like tiny people walking around without any massive detailing. This could just be me reading into it too much and giving 11-bit too much credit, but it feels like it's that way for a reason. Humanity is a massive theme in the game, and as the starting cutscene told us, the majority of it has been lost to the snow. This lack of detail on the citizens connotes this, as they are devoid of anything that makes them look totally human. Yes, they have 2 arms and legs and walk around and talk like real people, but their humanity, the thing that sets them apart from just being a body moving around, is gone, and thus they look like this. The only times we see humans in more detail are during the events. The art for these events is beautiful and effectively conveys to the player what the people are feeling. If they are hopeful, then we can tell from their expressions, and the same can be said for a lack of hope. This tells us that through these events, the colony is reclaiming some of its lost humanity, no matter if it's for the better or the worse. The rest of the sound in game is something that cannot be understated. The music especially is fantastic and has been in the background of this entire video. The orchestral soundtrack perfectly conveys the feelings of hopelessness and dread that the rest of the game is pushing onto the player. A lot of songs have a ticking sound that conveys time running out for the player and the colony. This is especially effective at putting the player under pressure without them even knowing, as they are constantly aware of the passing time and how much needs to be done. A final thing to note, if you need any more convincing, is that the creator of the soundtrack also worked on the Witcher 3 soundtrack, which is well renowned for being one of the best examples of audio design in gaming. The other sound effects are just as powerful. The one I mentioned earlier that plays relentlessly for nearly every event in the game instills feelings of dread. Hearing this sound means something has happened, and in a game like Frostpunk, when something happens, it's rarely good news. Granted, there are occasional pieces of news that are good, but for the most part, hearing this sound means something's gone wrong. When things go drastically wrong resulting in death, this sound is accompanied by a bell toll. This is a sound that's familiar to most people, but it's still no less effective at filling the player with regret and sadness at the loss of a citizen. The singular toll is definitive and tells the player that there is nothing to do now but move on and try to prevent the same thing happening again. Another sound you will hear relentlessly over the course of the game is the horn marking the start of a new day, along with the voice of your subordinate, encouraging everyone to go to work. Depending on what book of laws you choose later, this changes into either a bell toll with some preaching, or a darker sounding horn with a more commanding tone over a loudspeaker. Every time you hear it, you've completed another day, and it's almost like the game is telling you, yes, we're alive today, but the job isn't done yet. The voice often says, which, while directed at the workers, is also relevant to the player, as they aren't ever completely out of the woods. The story of Frostpunk is something that can be mostly ignored since the majority of it is told through text logs found when exploring the map. While each place you discover has its own story, the main part goes like this. As you send out your first scouts to collect the rest of the refugees from London, you find out about another city like your own that was meant to be a bastion in the cold. You set out in search of others, but all the way you find signs that suggest you might be alone. Hope falls as you uncover more of the story until you finally come to Winterhome, your last hope for nearby civilization. You find only ruins and corpses along with a chronicle telling you what happened. The city ran out of food, and, in their despair, people turned to anarchy and fought for the last of the resources before eventually falling to starvation. The final entry states that the last few alive turned to eating the dead to survive, but it was no use and there was no hope. This triggers the choice of the 2 books of laws I mentioned earlier, along with some people forming a group that want to leave, known as the Londoners. This group will grow in numbers unless you do something to raise hope and reduce discontent caused by the haunting news of the colony's solitude. If you fail to do so, then everyone in the group will leave once you get nearer to the final days. It is possible to convince them all to stay before the deadline by increasing hope enough, and, even if you don't convince everyone, you can persuade the leavers either with high hope or force on the day of departure. Again, this is something that is left totally down to the player and what they deem is necessary. Shortly after the Londoners leave, you spot an approaching group of refugees. If you send out some scouts to bring them to the city, then they will tell you of a great storm approaching that will freeze nearly everything in its path, and with that, the countdown begins. After learning of the final storm, the colony must prepare for it to hit. This throws the stability of the colony out the window, as before all you had to do was get enough resources for people to survive, but now you have to stockpile for the final holdout. Food must be made en masse to feed everyone while it's impossible to find or grow anymore. The generator must be upgraded to its maximum capacity to keep people from freezing from the unfathomable cold. Coal production must be increased to fuel the generator and its near unquenchable demand. If you played the game before and know to prepare for this, then you can start making these changes early. But if it's your first time playing, this event causes panic as you desperately try to make all the changes necessary to survive. All the while this is happening, the music is building in tension as the temperature falls farther and farther below freezing. When the storm finally hits, there isn't much to do but wait and see if you've done enough, as the soundtrack crescendos in one of the best pieces of music I've heard in a long time. The City Must Survive perfectly encapsulates the massive mixed emotions you feel whilst watching your colony get battered by the unrelenting storm. If you do nothing else after watching this video, then please go and listen to this song and you will understand everything I'm trying to say, since most of it can't be put into words. This song, combined with the sound of the biting wind, is an experience I have yet to match in any other game. For the most part, the final storm provides very little in terms of gameplay. There are a few events that occur, and you need to manage the generator's power level, but aside from that, you're essentially waiting for the game to end, either from the passing of the storm or the death of the colony. Normally in games when you are given nothing to do but watch, the player might feel bored and it is deemed poor game design. In Frostpunk, this lack of control adds to the feeling of helplessness that's been building for the entire game, as now you really are helpless, and can only watch to see if you did enough before the time came. While you aren't physically doing anything, you are totally engaged with what is happening and waiting, desperately hoping for the end. If that isn't the pinnacle of gaming immersion, then I'm not sure what is. To wrap this up, I'd just like to say that I'm well aware that to most people, Frostpunk will just look like another game, and to an extent I can understand this perspective. It doesn't really do anything drastically innovative, and once you understand the gameplay, it's actually quite an easy game to complete, at least on normal difficulty. The reason I'm making this video is that despite all this, it's still a game that I get immersed by every single time I pick it up, and I really do mean it when I say I've yet to be pulled in this much by a piece of media since. The expansions added so far to the game are on par with A New Home, and with one yet to come out, I can't wait to see what's next. Thank you for watching this video essay on Frostpunk. I really hope you enjoyed, as this is a video I've wanted to make for a long time, and I've just now got around to it. If you'd like to see more of this type of video, then be sure to leave a like and a comment, tell me any ideas you have. If you'd like to see more strategy related content, then be sure to subscribe, as I have new videos coming out every single week. For now though, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.